Right, so Battle for Azeroth Alpha, new build came out towards the end of this week, and lots of changes, particularly to Retribution Paladins, and I'm sure you've seen all about it. If you were there at the time, of course, I threw up an extra late stream to actually go through a lot of those changes, but you've seen plenty of videos, I'm sure, already about people going, ooh, shiny, but how about we get into the details of it from a Retribution Paladin now? There's been several changes. There's been changes to baseline things. There have been changes to talents, massive changes to talents. In fact, it's absolutely fantastic. I have to say, having played this thing now, doing some solo content, doing some dungeon content, is pretty much all I can really do. It's not just way better than the previous build. That would be positive enough. It's way better than live. This thing is better than Legion, and it's not the finished product yet. It is already a better spec than for Legion. Now, up until a few days ago, everyone, as far as we could tell, because Blizzard seemed to be saying this, was a bit downcast about it. I mean, the reason why I put my post up about just, can we at least smooth these things out, was because no one really expected a massive amount to be done to the spec. Blizzard had said there's not going to be a massive amount done to the spec. They were of the view, or seemingly so, that, you know, these massive redesigns to the specs, and then you put the artifact traits on it, and the artifact traits were just the cherry on top. They were just something to be a bit special. But you can take them away and the rest of the spec's basically fine. No, it wasn't fine. And I have to confess, I should have had a bit more faith in Blizzard, because something they did when the alpha first went up, the open part of it a couple of weeks ago, didn't actually make sense. Now, Judgement is the key here. Judgement in live, of course, applies a debuff, which means your holy power spenders do more damage based on your mastery. You have to refresh it, but it's fair, you know, the cooldown, with any reasonable amount of haste, the cooldown on Judgement is only very slightly above the window of Judgement, so you can easily maintain it all the time, realistically. And it also cleaves to a secondary target, so you can have it on that, which is great as well. And then you greater Judgement, you could actually spread it much more, and then with an artifact ability as well, and you can spread it even further. But, of course, we didn't have Judge Unworthy on the alpha, but also Judgement wasn't even cleaving to the secondary target. Now, this made the mastery completely unworkable. The only way you could get any benefit out of your mastery was to take greater Judgement on the alpha. Now, that's a nonsense. We can't have a situation, I know we've got it in Legion, but you can't have a situation going into another expansion where we're always taking the same talent. There's a must-take talent, because then it's ridiculous. And I should have realised that probably indicated that they're going to be doing something about it. And they have. They've changed Mastery. Mastery now just buffs our holy damage. We do holy damage, we get it buffed by our Mastery. It's not quite as simple as that. It's not buffing, for example, Hammer of Wrath. Oh yeah, if you hadn't already heard, Hammer of Wrath's back. More about that in a bit, though. I also strongly suspect, although I've not been able to test it out, that it probably doesn't buff the holy damage you do as a Lightforged Draenei via Racial. So it just seems to be buffing most of our Retribution Paladin abilities that deal holy damage, apart from Hammer of Wrath. But that is a massive improvement. And it's all Retribution Paladins wanted. That's all we wanted. Just buff our holy damage. Just have our mastery buff our holy damage. Makes total sense. Absolutely fine. That's great. That's what we wanted. Thanks very much, Blizzard. And I actually mean this. I'm going to be going over here. I'm going to be gushing. This is not going to be critical at all. In fact, I am actually going to be saying, although this thing still needs to be done, there are still things that need to be done. And I'm not going to let go of some of those things. Nonetheless, what we've got here is magnificent. And I will be, as I did last week, putting up posts on the North American EU forums. I'm going to put links in the description below. If you're watching this video, as soon as I put it up, those links may not be there because I've got to actually post those things. But as soon as it is, I will put them in the description below, so just come back. And I would very much like, just as people did last week, for there to be some engagement there. I'm not putting them on the alpha forums. I'm putting it specifically on the class forums because I want lots of people to get engaged with this. So upvote the post if you agree with it. Add comments if you've got your own thoughts on it, which I really want people to do. If you don't agree with it, okay, you have your say as well. We need to do that. But engage. Let's engage now. Let's engage on the forums. Let's not take the attitude that Blizzard don't listen. Maybe they don't. But do you know what? They definitely don't listen if we don't say anything. It's as simple as that. Whereas if we do say something, maybe they will. Maybe they won't, but maybe they will. Is it really that much time for one time a week just to post a few comments or upvote a few things you agree with? Let's do that. So let's get into the abilities. Now, Wake of Ashes is still a talent. It's much improved in terms of where it's been placed, but it's still a talent. I want it to be baseline. I've made no secret of that. The reason is not just resource generation, because people say, well, it's on a 30-second cooldown. You know, it's not really part of your regular rotation. That misses the point. It's 5 Holy Power Instant Blast. This is absolutely brilliant when you suddenly need that burst. So there's some ads about to spawn in. They've got to be killed super quick, like the eyes on Gul'dan, that sort of thing. Or, you know, when ads appear on Antoran High Command. Wake of Ashes is brilliant for that because it's just there, and then you can be going into a Divine Storm and all the rest of it. It's instant burst. Obviously, in Legion, we mostly associate it with stacking up Crusade. Crusade is not necessarily going to be the go-to talent in BFA, so it's less important for that. But just that burst of Holy Power is what I want it for. However, I do sort of know that I might be on a losing battle there, because Blizzard have said anything that's to do with resource generation, they will look at increasing resource generation elsewhere. And they sort of have with this build, because as well as Crusader Strike and as well as Blade of Justice, Judgment now generates a Holy Power. We've got several, actually, ways of generating Holy Power depending on your talents. But in terms of baseline, we've now got Judgment, Crusader Strike and Blade of Justice all generating Holy Power. Judgment generates 1 Holy Power. It's got a slightly shorter cooldown compared to Live as well. And that's not the be-all end-all. You might now think, oh, is it just like a ranged version of Crusader Strike where it does more damage and it's holy? And it is ranged and it does generate 1 Holy Power. But no, it's a bit better than that. It still applies debuff to the target. It's just not the Mastery debuff. It's not the Colossus Smash debuff. Now what it does when you use Judgment is it applies a debuff, which means that the next Holy Power spender will deal 25% more damage. Now, quite apart from what I've heard people saying, that meaning, oh, you can just fire it off, it makes no difference. It can actually make a difference depending on what talents you take. Sure, if you're just using the baseline things, you're not particularly taking any talents that change that, then, you know, if you're on single target, you're just using Templar's Verdict. You're just going to use it on Templar's Verdict. Does it really matter when you weave Judgment in there? Not really. Just make sure that you use it as much as possible. But there are some Holy Power spenders that can do more damage. Justicar's Vengeance will now do more damage. I'll get more onto that later. And Execution Centers could do more damage. I'll get onto that later. Now, if I have either of those, then I'd actually prefer that my Judgment debuff was consumed by that, because it's going to do more damage. So if I'm in a situation, let's say Execution Center, so it's on a cooldown, it's still got 5 seconds to come off, and I've got my Holy Power I want to spend, I'm going to use Templar's Verdict, but I've got Judgment available. I'm not going to judge Templar's Verdict, I'm going to just Templar's Verdict, build, Execution Centers now about ready, now I can judge, now use Execution Centers. I'm only delaying it by a short amount of time. You wouldn't delay it for a long time, that'd be silly, but I'd delay it for a very, literally a couple of seconds, and I'm going to get more benefit out of it. And it's that sort of thinking that the spec is allowing us to do now, because all we've ever wanted of the spec, apart from the fact that it can be competitive, we'll worry about that in the coming weeks, what we really want is a spec that first of all makes sense, because if it makes sense, the tuning sort of fits. I'm not going to go over tuning here. I'm not going to really mention about which one's better when you sim it and all the rest of it. Sims are a little bit dodgy at the moment anyway, but that will come naturally if the spec makes sense. It's only when something doesn't make sense that the tuning becomes very, very difficult for Blizzard to do. The other thing to bear in mind is what we really want is a spec where we can make meaningful decisions based on the circumstances and based on the talents we take. We've absolutely got that now. So, in terms of the talents, because this is where most of the changes have come in, there are some changes to baseline things compared to live, but they were in the previous alpha build. I've already gone through those. So what we've got on the first row now, we've got a Greater Judgment. Now, Greater Judgment doesn't spread Judgment anymore. It doesn't cleave. What it does have the reverse execute effect on it. So it's no longer above 50%. It's now going to be above 60%. But Judgment always crits above 60% health. Now, this has a benefit in a couple of situations. One, it's actually quite good for soloing. You can see I've got it selected. I'm using it for soloing because I'm just going in with Judgment. Well, it's 100% health before I've judged it. So I'm always going to get the crit there. In terms of where it would be useful at level cap, here's how I envisage it. First of all, it could be more useful in AoE situation because the next two, which I go over, will be for pure single target. And here's the thing. Let's say you've got a group of mobs and you judge your main target. All right, and you have Divine Storming. But now your main target's gone below 60% health. Well, now you can just switch target and judge that instead. Okay, because that, or any target that's still above 60% health. So again, it gives you that thinking there. You're sort of thinking to yourself, where's the best target to use it? I'm not just going to mindlessly judge. They're all going to get Divine Stormed anyway. So one mob is randomly going to get 25% extra damage from that Divine Storm. So which one can I use it on for best effect? And moving it around there. Just again, it engages you. It's a bit more engaging. The next one is Righteous Verdict. This works very much like Whisper of the Nathrezim, except it's only for Templar's Verdict. Templar's Verdict gives you a buff. That buff will last for 6 seconds. Better than the 4 seconds for Whisper of the Nathrezim. You don't need loads of haste to get benefit from that. And what it means is, as long as I use a Templar's Verdict before it expires, that Templar's Verdict will do some extra damage there. So you still won't necessarily always be able to maintain 100% on it. Be a lot easier than with Whisper of the Nathrezim. Depends on your haste, of course. But it's a maintenance buff there that will just directly buff your Templar's Verdict. Very useful if Templar's Verdict is what you're going to be using all the time, because it's a single target boss, something like that. Then we've got Execution Sentence. Execution Sentence works very, very differently now. No longer is it the slowly falling hammer of doom, or very slowly coming doom. Now it does its damage instantly. Boom. Okay? It also puts a debuff on the target. That means for the next 10 seconds, my Holy Power spenders will do 25% more damage. In fact, all of my holy damage will do 25% more. So the ideal situation here with Execution Sentence is make sure you're ready to absolutely go with all your hardest hitting holy damage dealers in that 10 seconds. It has a fixed 30-second cooldown. It's not affected by haste anymore. It does quite a lot of damage. You can see here, if I look here, 3,708 holy damage. Oh yeah, we've got the squish. As opposed to 3,046, which is same for my Templar's Verdict. Okay. Now, on to the next row. Fires of Justice just does what Fires of Justice does. You can sort of see this as being, as we'd use it at the moment, if you've got a bit too much downtime, you're not quite comfortable with it, you want to smooth out your rotation. Shorter cooldown on Crusader Strike to generate a bit more holy power there, and also as a bit of a filler, Fires of Justice. However, if you're not finding yourself using Crusader Strike that much or that regularly, then it's not going to be useful. Blade of Wrath is exactly what Blade of Wrath is in live as well, and it's, you know, useful for single target, useful for AoE. You're going to straight up deal significantly more holy power with this talent than any of the other talents in this row. And at the moment, it's sort of looking better than anything there. But we've got Hammer of Wrath. Now, Hammer of Wrath works exactly the same it did before. This is a big surprise to me, a welcome surprise. Very, very popular inclusion. And believe you me, if they ever think about removing it again, there'll be hell to pay. I don't think they will. They've put it back in. They're obviously intended to keep it. Now, obviously, people would prefer that it were baseline, you know, and, you know, maybe just posting about that. We'll see what Blizzard think about that. But it does what it did before. It's an execute ability, so it works below 20%. It also works during Avenging Wrath. However, the actual damage of it at the moment is not that fantastic. In fact, it does less damage than Templar's Verdict. It does less damage than Execution Sentence, than Justicar's Vengeance. The only thing it does more damage than is basically Crusader Strike. Obviously, Divine Storm on a single target as well, but you don't use Divine Storm on a single target. So it's actually a weak ability at the moment, but it does generate a holy power. Now, for me, that is a tuning issue, so I'm not going to go too much into that. All I would say is, probably should do more damage than Templar's Verdict, at least. Now, as I said before, Hammer of Wrath isn't affected by Mastery. I don't know what the reason for that. I don't think it's a bug, because it seems a weird bug. It could be. It could just be, you know, they've neglected to do that because they've only just brought it back in. That's possible. I hope that's the case. It doesn't make sense for me, because here's the thing. I mean, if it was affected by the Mastery, then that might actually sneak it a little bit above the Templar's Verdict. So, yeah, I don't really get why that is. But it is back, and we should rejoice in that. I said before, Alpha's very new out. There's still half a year to go before the game comes out, at least. And Blizzard have got time to do a lot of things, and they will do a lot of things. For example, even the position of some of these talents will change, and I'd be very surprised if all 21 of these talents were still the 21 talents that we go live with. There's lots of scope for changing a lot of things here. But with Hammer of Wrath, yeah, I think we can say thanks very much for putting it back, and we'll just keep an eye on what they're going to do with it, because they're surely going to do something with it. On to the next row, and it basically does what it does in live. Fist of Justice is now, you know, each holy power just reducing Hammer of Justice by 2 seconds. But the others and do exactly what they do, but they work in the same way. No great changes there. On to the next one, and it's all change. Divine Vengeance. Divine Storm now has a 50% chance to refund 1 holy power if it hits 3 or more enemies. But the way it is, you would only use it on 3 or more enemies anyway. There's no situation realistic where you can use it on 2 enemies, because even the baseline damage just straight up does half, less than half I should say, of what Templar's Verdict does. And then when you consider your Judgment debuff is only going to benefit a single target, that means even sometimes with 3 targets, it's only a bit of an increase, but it is an increase. So you would only ever use this when there's at least 3, unless you're making a mistake. So that's fine. It's basically as if it's 50% chance to refund 1 holy power. You can almost imagine that talent is meaning that Divine Storm is going to give you basically half the holy power equivalent per use. Consecration is a little bit better. It does a bit more damage now, but also it generates a holy power. And as we tested yesterday, it generates its holy power even if you don't hit anything. It's not like Divine Hammer, which is gone, by the way. Divine Hammer is gone. So your Consecration will just generate a holy power. It does its effect over 10 seconds, which is fixed, not affected by haste. It has a cooldown of 15 seconds, which again is fixed, not affected by haste. Usual thing with Consecration, what am I playing at there? In the... Oh, it kills squirrels, good, and rabbits. In that it is static in one place. Usual thing, if you've got a load of ads and you can trust the tank to keep them there for 10 seconds, then this could be really good in fortified Mythic Plus dungeons, or even just dungeons that have a crap load of really awkward trash. Now, on to the one that is my personal favourite, and I have to wait for Consecration cooldown to come off, is Wake of Ashes. This doesn't work quite the way it does in live, because it's got a 45-second cooldown, and it doesn't apply a dot, but in other respects it is the same. But it is the same as in the previous alpha build. Now, this is clearly going to be the go-to talent for single target, because Divine Vengeance and Consecration are clearly AoE. Wake of Ashes becomes our single target talent. That's not to say that it also wouldn't be suitable in a situation where you've got boss and some ads, or in dungeons, something like that. The big thing for me, again, is that 5 holy power that generates. But if we're honest, and this is where I may be not going to fight over this like a dog over a bone, when I talk about the 5 holy power being really important when we need that burst, that quick burst, if we're honest, we don't always need that quick burst. There are some fights where we do. And on those fights, I'm actually okay now where it is in the talent tree, not where it was before, but where it is now. I'm okay having it as a talent, because I'll take it in that situation. I'll take it when I'm soloing, I'll take it on a single target boss, and I'll take it when I need that instant burst to burst down super high priority ads really, really quickly. Because I don't mind not having Consecration or Divine Vengeance. So I'm okay with this. I'm actually quite happy with this now. I think it's fantastic, and I'm okay with it being a talent as long as it remains in a similar row to this. My fear is if they again move things around, and the way it was done in Legion, I got the strong impression, because they moved talents around quite a lot, I got the strong impression that sometimes they just put them in random places early on in Alpha, that is, just to see how people reacted, what combinations people used, and then if they saw a particular combination that they thought, no, we're not going to like that, then they would move them around again. So I have a bit of a fear on this. I'd still prefer it was just made baseline. I don't have to worry about it. But if it stays like this, I'm happy. I'm happy. On to the next one, and this hasn't actually really changed since the last build. Cavalier still does what Cavalier does. Bear in mind, Divine Steed has a 1-minute recharge time as opposed to 45 seconds in live. Unbreakable Spirit, remember Divine Intervention is gone, but it still reduces the cooldown of our Divine Shield by 30%. It's not quite enough. Divine Shield just has too long a cooldown baseline for me. Lay on Hands by 30%. Well, a 7-minute Lay on Hands is still a 1 use per fight thing. So thinking for raiding in particular, it's not fantastic, is it? You're not really getting any great benefit out of that. And Shield of Vengeance, okay, on a fight where you can get a lot of use out of Shield of Vengeance, fine, fair enough. But Shield of Vengeance, remember, is an offensive ability because it deals damage. And that's one of the things I was talking about last week. Eye for an Eye still does what Eye for an Eye does. It's got a different symbol. It's got the Zeal symbol. Reason for that is because the current Eye for an Eye symbol was for a buff called Inquisition that we used to have, and we've got, again, a bit more about that in a moment. So, but this row basically works exactly as it did in the previous alpha build, so there's nothing new there. On to the next one. There's some things moved around, but we've got Judgement of Lights here. That, for me, out of all these talents now, out of every talent we've currently got on the BFA alpha, is the only dead talent. The rest of them, again, tuning issues at the moment might mean that there's one you wouldn't necessarily take, but I can see a use from a philosophical point of view for every single talent, apart from Judgment of Light. It's never going to be as good as Word of Glory or Justicar's Vengeance. It's just not. Not for Ret Paladin. So, although I quite like the concept in theory of Judgment of Light, the actuality of it is that it's too weak to be of use compared to the other two. So on to Justicar's Vengeance. Now I want to re-emphasise, this was the same as in the previous alpha build, but I want to re-emphasise. On live, we only consider Justicar's Vengeance as an expensive self-heal. Alright? When you're soloing, it's really good because you can stun enemies and get extra healing out of it, a lot of extra healing. And of course, it actually does decent damage then. If you can stun a mob, then actually it's worth using even for damage. But generally speaking, it's not worth it because our artifact traits buff the hell out of Templar's Verdict and don't buff Justicar's Vengeance, to the point where Templar's Verdict basically does more damage to Justicar's Vengeance and costs fewer holy power. So from a damage point of view, no. But now that's different. Justicar's Vengeance does more damage than Templar's Verdict. Not enough that it's worth using the 5 holy power for it. You wouldn't habitually use Justicar's Vengeance if you took it, but there are two situations under which you would. One, if the mob is stunned. Now, it doesn't do double damage, it does 50% extra damage, but that's still just about worth the 5 holy power, but it is marginal. So I'm not saying you would definitely use Justicar's Vengeance in that situation for damage, but if you needed even a little bit of healing, then it's worth using. But here's where it's really worth using. If you take Divine Purpose, because that's still in, then Divine Purpose procs, which doesn't matter whether the thing costs 3 holy power or 5 holy power, it just gives it you for free effectively, then absolutely you would use that on Justicar's Vengeance. So on single target, if you get a Divine Purpose proc and you've got Justicar's Vengeance, then you take it. On to the next one, Word of Glory. This has been buffed a little bit and made a little bit more useful. Now, it still suffers from the twin problems that I have with it, in that it costs 3 holy power and has a 1-minute recharge time, albeit having 2 charges. Now, my issue is I think it should have one of those things, not both. Either it can cost holy power, but I get, as long as, because I have to keep generating holy power to keep using it, but I should get to keep using it. Or it has the 1-minute recharge time, but doesn't cost anything. The fact that it does both, I'm not really happy about. But they're not really budging on that, so, you know. But in other regards, it works better now. My main other beef with it was always that it has a short range. It's only realistically going to heal melee in a raid situation. But melee, of course, you know, if melee aren't taking loads of damage, because you know what? We're good players. We don't stand in fire. We're not ranged, standing there in the fire going, no, must get this cast off before I move. None of that. Word of Glory in live doesn't help that situation. You're not going to heal that person. They're too far away. They've now increased the range to 30 yards. So we can now help heal the simpletons at the back who insist on finishing off that last cast. But also it does a bit more healing, because instead of healing yourself and 4 friendly targets, in live, it does heal yourself and 4 friendly targets. In live, heals yourself and 5 friendly targets. Always a little bit odd, because this, for me, although I talk about it from a raid point of view, is actually of more use in dungeons where people maybe are more grouped up. It's much more, even in live, more realistically able to help a few people out. But healing 6 people, obviously no point in dungeons. So it's going to heal 5 people, and it heals for more. So Word of Glory actually for dungeons could be pretty good. Could be a good one to take. Then on to the final row. So we've got Divine Purpose, works exactly the same, no changes there. Crusade has been nerfed a little bit in that it can only stack up 10 times. But bear in mind, compared to the previous alpha build, we can use Wake of Ashes. So Crusade can now be stacked up very quickly, because you could take Wake of Ashes with Crusade. And I would think it would be very surprising if anyone ever took Crusade and didn't take Wake of Ashes. I mean, obviously we need to wait for tuning to be done and further in before we see what Blizzard really want to do with all this. But wouldn't it be surprising if you didn't take Wake of Ashes with that? And then finally, we've got Inquisition again. So, Inquisition, a little bit better than it was before. It's going to buff our damage and haste. Just as it was when it was in the game before, we can spend 1, 2 or 3 Holy Power on it. And that affects the amount of time it's going to be up for. It's 15 seconds per Holy Power in this particular iteration. But you can stack it up to a minute. So, if I can take Inquisition, if I just show you, let's say I go in and I judge. I've got 1 Holy Power. So I can do that. Then I use Wake and I can use it again and I've stacked it up to basically a minute. I can't stack it beyond a minute. So if I try now to use it, it won't let me use it. It says a more powerful spell is already active. Once it drops below 45 seconds, I can use it to top it up by another 15 seconds. But I've wasted Holy Power doing it. So you do need to be a little bit mindful of how much Holy Power you've got, how much you're really going to use. If you've got 3 Holy Power, for example, it's worth 45 seconds, so you would not use that until it dropped below 15 seconds. Now, opinion is very much divided on Inquisition. There are a lot of people who are very disparaging of it, and they don't like it at all. They don't like the maintenance buff. It's not baseline, and I'm not going to come out with the Blizzard stating, great, that's why it's a talent, choose another one, because that's stupid thinking. But if we're honest, Crusade and Divine Purpose are perfectly good alternatives. Divine Purpose, very passive. Crusade, we're used to in Legion anyway. Obviously, you know, it's going to last a lot shorter. But, you know, we do have those. And we all know that in a talent situation, unlike what Blizzard say, there is going to be a situation where one talent's going to sneak a bit ahead of the other. But unless you're absolutely min-maxing it, usually it can be the case that if you just didn't want to use Inquisition, I would be certain that you will not have to when BFA goes live. Because if it stays like this row, I think Crusade and Divine Purpose will be fine, unless you're absolutely min-maxing. And if you are absolutely min-maxing, you have got no issue with Inquisition at all. It's easy to keep up. It's not a big hassle. I think where people have had real issues with it before, I think people just don't like the idea of spending Holy Power on something that doesn't give direct damage. Because it gives indirect damage because it buffs everything else. I think it's that. I think it's just, in people's minds, they want to use Holy Power for big spenders. You know. Now, of course, there are also people who like it, though. This is not just something that a lot of people don't like and rested neutral on. There are people who actively like Inquisition and are delighted it's come back. So I think it's great. I'm a supporter of this. I'm quite happy with Inquisition there. Really good. Now, in terms of soloing, what I'm particularly using at the moment is I'm using Greater Judgment, Divine Purpose there, Blade of Wrath, Wake of Ashes, Just Cause Vengeance, Cavalier, Fist of Justice. This actually is really good for soloing. It's a really nice talent build. When I'm in sort of dungeons, I did a dungeon last night, which I'll do a video on a bit later when I get a chance. I was actually taking Execution Sentence, even though, as I've already said, probably Greater Judgment might be a little bit better, but maybe, maybe not. Obviously, Blade of Wrath in that situation as well. Hammer of Wrath, you know, I'd love to take it, but it's not quite doing enough damage for me at the moment. When I use it even on a bog standard mob, it doesn't kill it outright. And I think on a bog standard mob, just a bog standard one, when you're solo leveling, when you get to below 20%, I would expect it to finish it off. And it's not quite doing that. Unless I use it when it's well below 20%. So that's a bit disappointing. Wake of Ashes, I'm just using all the time because I love it. I feel it's an essential part of the spec, which is why I'd like it baseline. But as I've said before, I'm okay with it being like this as well. There's so many ways in which different talent combinations interplay as well. This is going to be a much more fun and engaging spec. Now, I will just have to add at the end, as we look upon this copy of the Statue of Uther from Stormwind, but this is in the new city area for Kul Tiras, that our 2-target and 3-target cleaves not ideal, but 2-target cleave is non-existent. That is one thing that is going to need to be fixed, I think, at the moment. If there is a worry at the moment, there's 2 main worries, if you were to ask me that. I don't want to really put a downer on this video, but just to quickly finish off. First of all, the Retribution Passive is still there. Let's get the actual spell book up. Now, but you can see what they've done with it. They've reduced it to 10 seconds from 20 seconds. Now, that's basically acknowledging that there's a problem. They've already acknowledged that there's a problem, even during Legion. But rather than getting rid of it, they're just nerfing it like this. My issue with that is twofold. First of all, the damage component has to be removed. If they want to keep the Retribution Passive, fine. Remove the damage component. Either replace it with something that doesn't do damage, or just leave it as a defensive. That's fine too. Other people have come up with good ideas. I mean, I came up with the ideas. You could either just give us a movement speed buff or make us glow yellow, just something cosmetic. Other people have said, you know, putting a random shield on someone, something like that. A mini shield of vengeance on a random person or something like that. But something defensive, something more. I mean, that fits the Paladin class fantasy better anyway. The protection of others as opposed to just going into a blind rage. That's more warrior fantasy. But regardless of fantasy, it's just gameplay a nightmare. But yeah, the 2-target cleave, the problem is we haven't actually got anything. In terms of abilities, you know, okay, Wake of Ashes is going to do some damage on a second target. It's decent on one target. It's going to do extra on two. But then after that, what are you going to do? You can't Divine Storm on 2 targets, as I've said. And even on 3 targets, depending on the talents you've got, you also may or may not get much benefit from that. In reality, in terms of the talents I've been taking, I find it useful. So even on 3 targets, I'll Divine Storm. But there are situations in raids, and there's certainly situations in dungeons, where you are going to need some 2-target cleave. And the idea of us just being stood there doing single target rotation when there's a second mob right to the left of us, or to the right of us, or upside down, or wherever, is going to be a bit maddening. We're going to be a bit weak on those fights. So it's a fantastic start. There is still work to be done, but it's a massive bonus in terms of where we are and where we're going. This is the right way to look at it. It's brilliant. And I want people to be able to say that. I really want to get some engagement going. I'm going to keep doing this each week. At least one. There's going to be several videos actually each week because there's a few things I want to talk about as well in more detail. Or just, you know, I want to do a video on the dungeon I did as well to give my thoughts on that. But what we absolutely need to do is to engage on the forums. It's all right saying, well, Blizzard don't listen. There is one time when Blizzard are guaranteed not to listen. That's when you don't say anything. So let's get on the forums, let's engage. I'll put links in the description below. Hopefully you'll be able to see those. Upvote comments you like. If you don't agree with mine, then upvote someone who's disagreeing with me, or put your own comments disagreeing with me. But just let's engage, shall we? Let's get there. Let's not give the excuse of, well, Blizzard never listen. They don't need to listen if we don't say anything. And it's as simple as that. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with anyone else who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.